Hi, friends. I have Brenda Swanson with me. We chatted earlier about her father-in-law with Parkinson's and the caregiver role she served. I invited her to share her experiences on the journey with him as we celebrate our caregivers and care partners during the month of November. I came across Brenda's postings on social media, which included her father-in-law's life on her farm in California. He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's years before that, and I was moved by the love and care she provided him. Brenda, thank you so much for being here. Now, you told me you brought your dad to live with you after his wife passed, and you served as his caregiver for, I think you said 2.5 years before he passed. And I have to say, I was devastated when you shared that with me because I loved seeing the videos of him and found him very endearing. And he looked very content on your farm. But tell me more, if you're comfortable, about the decision to bring him into your home. You moved him from Arizona to California and how you took over as his caregiver. All of this during the pandemic. So you really had no help. Everything was shut down.
Right. I think I lead everything with my faith, so a lot of answers are pretty simple to me, whether I like them or not. But we were at we got a call that my mother-in-law took a turn for the worse, and she was the healthy one. So we were all like totally caught off guard by that, and so we immediately got on a plane to try to go see her before she passed. And in that, like flights weren't available, and it was like March 19th when COVID was really, really, really getting the lockdowns on the freeways and things like that. So we just risked it all, got on a plane, and she passed before we even got on our first plane, and we had 2 planes to go. So it was a long, long trip, but we got to Arizona finally. And at her funeral, I kind of noticed my dad sitting off to the side. My father-in-law, I always call him my dad, but I saw him sitting off to the side, and I was like, who's going to take care of him? Like, wow. Because it seemed like my mother-in-law was always in charge of taking care of him, and they had care and everything set up in Arizona. But circumstances came to a screeching halt. And to be honest with you, everybody was wondering what I was doing, but I literally sat in their backyard and I prayed and I talked to God. And I have a very like candid relationship with God. And I remember looking up and like, really? Like, really? This is what you're giving me right now. And I was like, okay, well, and so I have my really good friend in California. Her name is Miss Marilyn, and I called her and I just asked for her advice because she's just one of those people. And she's like, you know what you got to do? And I said, yeah, I do. And she said, the only thing you have to do is protect his dignity. And that simplified it enough for me. And so while we were at the funeral, we packed up his old Chevy truck because we just flew there. We didn't even have our truck with us. We packed up his old Chevy truck that I wasn't even sure would make the journey. And I'm looking at this man, and he is so sad and so broken and on so much medication. He was literally taking hydrocodone. He was taking fentanyl. He was, oh my gosh, like the list was a mile long. And I'm looking at this man, and I'm like, I didn't even think, honestly, in my opinion, that he would make the trip home. But I needed him to know that he wasn't forgotten. He wasn't like off in a corner. He wasn't desperate for anything. That I had him, even if he didn't make the road trip, which I didn't honestly think he would. I just needed him to know that he had people that really, really cared about him. So I sat in the back seat and I just stared at him, and I don't even think very many words were spoken during that trip because it was a lot to take in. It really was. But I sat there and I watched my husband drive, and my father-in-law sat there, and he was backseat driver, and we made it through the trip, and then we got home like super late at night. And then reality really hit me really hard because we didn't have a bed set up for him. Our house is a farmhouse. Like, it's not designed in any way, shape, or form to be like for somebody that needed that much medical care. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's 17 years prior, and his dementia and everything had kicked in too. But he was just so angry and in so much pain and so lost. And he and he was going to take it out on everybody around him. But it really hit me really hard when we got home, because this man, he never slept because he was on so much hydrocodone. He was up and at 'em like 24/7, ready to go. And I was exhausted, like completely exhausted. And so he had this mentality that, you know, he was going to get coffee at 4 a.m. and he was going to get this and he was going to get that. And I really had to stop at some points and say, you know, we're a team, and, you know, I am the only one here. So I can't get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I can't be up at 11 o'clock at night, and we have to kind of work towards something. But I kind of had to also prioritize how things were, because as mad as he was at my mother-in-law passing, he was mad because that wasn't the plan. You know, he was going to go first. I really had to work on that and his depression. And so we pulled out pictures of Mom, and we talked a lot about how beautiful she was and how amazing she was. And we talked about his past history with her and things like that. And then I said the best way to honor her would be to plant her favorite flowers. So I went to Home Depot and I got like every red flower that I could imagine, and we started planting those. And that really brought him like some sense of comfort and peace in that. And, you know, gardening with your hands in the dirt and stuff, that's just the best thing that you could do. You could really feel a shift in him because he was kind of so desperate. Like, he was scared, and he had my mom, you know, his whole life, pretty much from the time he was 17. So this is really the first time that he was without her. And I told him, I said, you know, it's okay to be mad at Mom, but you still love her and you'll see her again soon. And I'm like, so let's just let all that go. And you could just feel him shift in those kind of moments.
Talk about the journal that you kept.
And the first thing that was crazy was, with his dementia, I would walk in at 8 a.m. and he's like, well, it's nice you woke up, you know? And I'm like, okay, Dad, I was here at 4, I was here at 5, I was here at 6. And he goes, no, you weren't. And so that's where I got the idea for the journal. And I wrote it to him, basically, and I laid it out on the counter. And so I would write 4 a.m., brought coffee and toast. And so you could see him on the camera, because we had cameras everywhere, just for his safety. And so when I was getting ready to go over there, I could look at him get up and check the journal, and he would see that I already been there twice, and then he would go sit back down. But that was his that was his secret journal that he kept track of everything for him. So he learned to check that before he banked on his dementia.
You mentioned he got sick. He had a bladder infection one time, and he sort of made things a little challenging for you, which talks
Yeah.
more towards the impact that the disease itself, not the person, can affect the caregiver and make that a struggle. Can you share more about that?
One day I walked in and he was sitting there with a knife and he threatened to slit my throat. With that being said, I knew that he was out of his mind, right, one way or another. So then I went to the journal, and I saw, like, whenever he would drink something, I would put like a glass of water or whatever. And I noticed that he hadn't really been drinking like what I'd been giving him for the past couple of days. So it got into my brain that it might be some kind of an infection. And so I called the doctor with all this. And so the doctor allowed me to go to the office, pick up a urine sample cup, take it back home. And then it was a bladder infection. And that's what was causing all that chaos in his brain. And then also too, like, document all of his medications and stuff, like to the T, to the letter. When he first came here, he was very violent, and he would say like really grotesque things. And so me and his doctor sat down and we talked about it. And when we pulled his carbidopa levodopa, the extended release at night, that was the last thing that he took before he had hallucinations, right? That's through my documentation in the journals. And so that pill wasn't really necessary because we really wanted him to be sleeping at night. So we pulled that pill, and all of a sudden, all the gruesome like hallucinations that he was having stopped immediately.
You did a lot of research, but you also maintain communication with his doctors. This wasn't just you doing your own thing,
100%.
referencing Dr. Google. I mean, you did work closely with his doctors, so that's important to know.
100%. Like, I would, well, because he was a new patient to this California doctor. So,
Right.
and the nurses were all amazing. So I would call them up and I'd be like, he's acting very violent right now, and he's doing this and he's doing that. And then we would brainstorm it together. Like, you know, I feel like he might be dehydrated. And then they would say, well, that wouldn't be the cause of that. And, you know, we would just go back and forth and back and forth. And we would really set up the appointment to be successful, because once he got in there, he was just going to be a tyrant. So I needed them to know all the information that needed to be known before we went to the doctor's appointment. And then I would make a doctor's appointment. And then we would talk about like the extended release, you know, stopping that, or trying to match what's causing what and what's doing what. You know, it's really a challenge. But if you journal everything, you can see things like, I could literally say, you know, you're going to be dehydrated tomorrow because you haven't drank enough of this today. And then one of the weird things about the journal that became a huge thing was I would always document his moods too. He hated that. So if I ever put like it was an unhappy face because he was grumpy, he would get so mad and he would cross that off. And then all of his scribbles, I'm sure he was trying to say I was not. So the next time I would walk in, he would be like, hi, I'm really happy today. Like he was always trying to get smiley faces.
Yeah. That's cute.
But with my father-in-law too, a lot of people, a lot of the nurses didn't take his whole self into consideration, because I believe what caused his Parkinson's was a railroad accident where a huge railroad door, the metal door, swung open and it tore the side of his face off, including his eyeball. With his one eye, what I would tell, like the nurses would come to our house and they would go to reach for him, and they would come on his left side. And his left side is his blind spot. So if you're coming at him from the left side and he can't see you, and then all of a sudden there's a person there, and then he would jerk away from the nurse and almost fall over every single time. So I would pull the nurse aside, and I'm like, it's very important that you remember that his left eye is a prosthetic and he can't see on his left side. So please take that into consideration when you're talking to him, or when you're dealing with him, because he like jumps, like he just saw a person just appear out of nowhere.
It was startling to him, I would imagine.
Yeah. And when his dementia started to get worse and worse, he would not understand why his hand was shaking when he first woke up. So every single morning, like Groundhog's Day, we had to have the conversation. And we're like, you know, you have Parkinson's, you know, you have dementia, and you can't get up and just run around, and we have to do things a certain way. And, you know, it started to get kind of harder and harder as he forgot. And he was just sitting there, like, looking at his hand, like, why are you shaking? And why can't I get up and go to the bathroom? And he would forget all these things. And so he literally thought 3 times a day he was having massive heart attacks. And so, of course, like, I called 911. And he had a pacemaker. So we had his pacemaker checked out, and the paramedics were like, his heart rate is fine. And we would still take him to the hospital and get it confirmed again that it was fine. So after about the 3rd time of this, I started thinking, like, it's got to be something else. It's got to be something else. So I searched fake heart attacks in Parkinson's. And this lady said that I found her video, and she said that she has these tremors inside of her chest that's related to Parkinson's, and a lot of people don't know about the internal tremors that you have. And so I went to my dad and I just said, does your heart feel like your hand? And he didn't even answer. You could just see it in his face, like the relief, and you could just feel like all that tension, because he literally thought he was dying of a heart attack. And once I said that, he's like, it does. Yeah, that's it.
One gentleman I know has internal abdominal tremor, and he said they're awful. So I can't imagine, you know, if he's thinking it's a heart attack, it must have been very scary for both of you.
Yeah, and for him to not be able to communicate that in a way, and for him not to understand it in a way that I could understand it, you know, that was one of the really hard moments for me, because I honestly did think he was going to die of a heart attack. And I'm like, wait, he has a pacemaker. And, you know, just did some research and talked to his doctor and things like that. And he never, ever once said anything about internal tremors again or having a heart attack ever again.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of like comforted him to know that that's what that was, you know. And then one other thing too, he had this huge green squishy ball, and whenever his tremors would start, he would start squeezing that and not a stress ball. It was huge, like a size of a grapefruit, and it was really squishy. And so if you kind of redirect the tremors to give him something else to do, instead of having like a nervous tremor, he would have like a calm squeezing motion going on in his hands. That goes into like his massage chair and stuff, you know, like if he was in pain or he had his tremors, I thought like, what if we outweighed the tremors? You know what I mean?
You outstimulated the tremors.
Yeah, and then I think in that situation, his body just said, "Okay, I give up." Like, I'm not, like it kind of forgot about the tremors in his hands, and it kind of forgot about that, and then he would just giggle and fall asleep. And it's one of the greatest gifts that I think I did was, well, number one, of course, prayer. Number two, the journal, and number three,
Right.
that chair.
Right.
Because
Right.
nothing could beat that.
Right. Right. He looked content in that chair.
So one of the best things that I did, I researched his hometown, not in Arizona, but where he was originally from. And he was actually born in 1940 in Missouri, and his mom and dad were very poor, and they had 11 kids. And so they lived on top of a bar, and the mom ran the bar during the day. The dad went to work, and he was responsible for 10 kids, right? However many there were at any given time. So that's why his house was designed the way that I did it, because the pool table kind of reminded him of the bar. And I found
right.
old pictures. Yeah. So in his house, it's all designed. His house is 3 feet away from my house. We built him a house over there. But so he had a pool table, and he had the video poker machine and everything. And that's where that kind of reminded him of his childhood. And we really talked about like the weirdest things came into play. Like I bought Depends, and he would refuse to wear them, like running around naked. And I'm like, okay, we can't be doing this. And I'm tired, you know, because it's messy, number one, and other things. So he one time he just goes, we can't afford it. And so what it came down to was back in 1940, you didn't run around with diapers on all the time. And it was just this weird thing where he was stuck in that time zone. And he goes, they're just too expensive. So what I did was I went and bought 5 cases of Depends, and I threw them in like a hoarded pile. And I'm like, see how many we have? We have plenty. You can use all you want. And so that's how that got fixed. But just to try to figure out where his mind was at the time.
Right.
And the older he got, the more down the road we got, the more he was just stuck in that in his childhood kind of time frame. And it wasn't that he didn't have access to all of it. It was because the time he met mom when she was 16. And so it was too emotionally heavy for him to think about anything that involved her. And to the level where they were married and they had plans and things like that. So he didn't want to talk about his life from like 20 to 70. And then so in the 80s, well, I have Parkinson's and dementia. That's no fun. So a lot of the conversations that we had were revolving around his childhood. So I actually found some of his old friends from the 1950s. And it was really, really cool. Yeah. And there's a picture of mom sitting on a car. And I posted that. And the lady asked who cropped her out, because she was sitting on the same car with the same picture of mom. And she was like, how's Bill? And it was just like the weirdest thing to be talking to a friend from like 50 years ago.
Right. Right.
But,
that's cool.
And when he missed mom, I could be like, you know, you guys used to hang out at the Handy House. And that was a house that sold French fries and you could go dance in. And he's like, how did you know that? I'm like, did you guys ever go on the Emerald? And he goes, that was a dancing ship. And I'm like, and the Gem Theater? And he goes, it was 5 cents. And I could like trigger all these memories in his brain and show like actual pictures. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's nice. That's nice that you could bring back good memories for him. Because you said too, I think that they were together, married for 63 years.
Yeah, and they dated
That's a
before that.
long time.
That was his only love. And then when I did decorate his house, I put mom's picture in the living room, of course. And he said, no, that has to go. And it was kind of he was very angry and he's like, get it out like that. And so I let him calm down. I walked outside and then I came back and I said, what's going on with that? And he goes, I can't see her. I can't see her like that. So actually the room that he slept in, I set it up so on mom's normal side of the bed, that was her picture and her sweater and her beautiful things with some red flowers, of course. And then, and so that's where he would go and sit with mom if he wanted to spend time with her, but he couldn't handle it just randomly out of the blue, like walking by her picture and things like that. And just understanding like what upset him and how to have those beautiful memories without it being a bad thing ever. So he knew he had his one space to go to be with mom. And that's where you'd find him sometimes, but not very often.
So you shared a couple of personal stories, and I want viewers to hear that really demonstrates the bond that you and he had. Like when you caught him on camera pretending to fall and calling for you for attention, and then also when you mentioned that you had surgery and he sat at your bedside watching over you for hours.
Yeah, that was, oh yeah. So if you can imagine, if you're around somebody that I described him as an Iceman on fire. That's how I described him. That's how I would describe him. And so he had this thing where I became like his comfort and his safety and his words and his everything. Like I was his medication, I was his water, I was his trip to the bathroom, I was everything. And I totally understood where he would feel unsafe if I wasn't like, and his thing was 4 feet. Like I had to be in the same room, like basically sitting on a couch next to him. And I'm like, sometimes I needed to take a shower. Sometimes I just needed to not be, to just do something different. Right. So he started this thing where every single time, if I left him, I would walk into the room and he would be laying on the floor, screaming about how he felt. And this all like you can see where this. So at first you walk in and you're like, oh my God, are you okay? Are you okay? And you help him up, right? And then about the 50th time, you're like, how did you not even break a single bone and you fell 50 times? That's incredible. And then you start to use your brain and you're like, So we put cameras all over everywhere. There wasn't a place that there wasn't cameras. Like you could always check on him and see where he was. And and I was just getting ready to take his lunch over, and I looked at the camera and I saw him scoot off the edge of the bed and sit on the floor and then lay down and start screaming. And I just watched him on camera, and it about like 5 minutes later, he gets himself up and he goes and he gets a drink of water because he's been yelling for 5 minutes for me. And he gets himself a drink of water, and then he goes and sits on the edge of the bed and he scoots down on the floor and he starts screaming for me like, Brenda, Brenda. And so I just watch him on the camera. And then I guess it was uncomfortable. So he got himself up again and he grabbed himself a pillow and he threw it on the floor, and then he scooted down and he was laying on the floor on his pillow and just going, Brenda, Brenda, I fell. And so, yeah, I was like, okay, the gig's up. So I went over there and he's like, I fell, where have you been? And I go, I saw that whole thing on camera. So you can get yourself up and here's your lunch. But it was things like that he would always do just to keep you on guard. Like, but you can just imagine the first time when you walk in and you're like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And he loved that kind of attention. So after a while, and I'm just like, I saw you.
Yeah. And the time that you had surgery, you said that he never left your side for hours.
Oh, he was so traumatized by that. But I had cysts that were rupturing on my ovary, and it was just unbearable pain. So I put it off as long as I could, but I just had to have the surgery, and it was outpatient. And I told him about it, and he was all worried, and he wanted to go to the hospital. And I was like, no, you can't go to the hospital because like COVID, and you have to stay here and be safe. But when I got home, he came in, and everybody's like, leave her alone. She just got home. She just got home. And I'm like, hi, Dad. I'm really fine, and everything's fine. And he was sitting on the bench, and it's a wooden bench on the edge of my bed that is probably so uncomfortable, like could not be comfortable. And I remember just telling him, Dad, I'm just going to sleep. I'll be fine. And I woke up like 4 or 5 hours later, and he was still sitting in that exact same position, didn't move. And then my husband and everybody that was supposed to be taking care of him, they said, we tried. He wouldn't take his pills from us. He wouldn't take a drink from us. He would not leave your side. He just sat there and guarded me that whole time. And you know what? That loving feeling, if that's
Yeah.
what this whole thing was about, was magical. Like, I don't think I've seen anybody care about me to that extent. And it was just like the most warm, wonderful thing to wake up and see him just sitting there. And then he was fine to
Right.
get up and then go do it. Like, he wasn't going to leave my side. He wasn't going to let anybody bother me. And he just let me sleep for 5 hours straight.
So it sounds like, you really weren't prepared. You had no training, but somehow you just sort of pulled everything together to serve as his caregiver. And I'm sure learned a lot about dementia and Parkinson's along the way.
Well, when people have Parkinson's and dementia, a lot of times they forget. So we kind of learned it together. A lot of my skills come from horses. I train horses and I teach autistic kids how to ride. But a lot of that, like, so in the wintertime, my horses get real thin because they're shivering all the time. And that to me looks like Parkinson's. And I realized that he wasn't going to win this battle if he didn't have enough calories in him. Like, his body was burning way more calories through his Parkinson's than he could have. He was just slowly going to get thinner and thinner and thinner and weaker and weaker and weaker. So he actually ate 5 times a day, pretty big meals. And so every cooking skill that I could possibly, like, I fried spaghetti, I looked up his mom's recipes, I looked up his wife's recipes. And like one morning I made a milk toast for him. And he looked at me like I was psychic, because that was what his mom fed him every morning for breakfast, milk toast. It's just really beautiful bread. And then you warm up some milk with a little bit of sugar and cinnamon, and you pour it over the toast. And I wish I would have got the expression on his face, because he looked at me like, how did you know? Like, nobody has known that for 50 years. And when my husband had to leave for work at 5 a.m, so I would go at 4 a.m. because I could not lift him. And if you see my pictures, like, I literally went to the gym and like power lifted as heavy weights as I could, so that when he went fishing, I literally carried him down to that fishing spot. Like, it took every ounce of every part of my being to take care of him, and it was worth every minute.
I was sad when you told me he had passed. Like I said, I found the videos of him very endearing. You sent me
Yeah.
a video of him where he's working in a little planter. And you said it was just days before he passed. What happened with the last days with you? How did those go?
So the nurses all came out, and he had a speech therapist, and we had a lot of nurses coming through towards the end. And I guess I was very naive to the situation. I honestly never felt like he was even going to make the trip to California. I didn't think he was going to make that, and it was his fight, and it was his determination, and it was like our teamwork and everything that made it last so long. So when the nurses finally were very necessary, because of a lot of stuff going on with him. They're like, he's dying. And I'm like, yeah, well, he's been dying for 2.5 years. Yeah. And I didn't believe them, because they told me he would never live like more than 30 days.
Mhm.
And I was like, yeah, they told me that. And I was in disbelief, because him and I would communicate in our own way that other people didn't even understand. And I'm like, he's fine. Like, this is how he's always been. I don't notice anything. And they're like, no, you're not. Like, they were trying to get through to me that it was clearly, coming towards an end. And I just didn't see it. Everybody kept saying he's only thriving because you are thriving him. And I said, well, that's how it's supposed to be. And that's great. And I'm okay with that. And they're like, when are you going to be done? And I'm like, whenever he's done. Like, I'm not going to make that decision, because they were trying to say, like, he's going to probably pass within this month, and do you want him to go to a hospital? And then the final outcome of that was he's better off at home. And we had really seriously talked about him not getting up in the middle of the night, and he had a call button to call me directly. And so he got up in the middle of the night and he drank a whole bottle of apple cider. I don't know why. And he left me, he left enough for one glass and he left a glass on the table. And then he went to bed and had a heart attack. And then, but when I went into his room that day, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning and the air was different. I don't know, like I knew before I even touched that door. I already knew. He would always put a lantern in the window for me and turn it on because it was dark in the morning, and the lantern wasn't there and that wasn't on, and that was probably how I knew. But when I went in there, the bathroom window was open, and I go through and locked up his house every single night, so I know for a fact that I locked that window. And you always keep the windows closed at night so the spirit can't escape, right? And so he actually opened that window, and there was a cool breeze coming through, and he was passed away.
Oh, wow. That must have been devastating.
At first I was like, this better not be a game, because he did a lot of games with me, and I was on the phone to 911 because I already knew, and I was talking to them, and they're like, well, you need to do CPR and you need to do this. And I'm like, no, it's 100%. Like, I just need somebody to come and see him. But his vitals the day before were perfect. He just had a little heart attack where his pacemaker didn't even kick in. And so what I tell everybody is, like, my dad didn't die from Parkinson's. He died of being 81 years old and of a heart attack, like, naturally. And so when people say I have Parkinson's, and it's not a death sentence.
This was not a cakewalk for you, and I've heard from some caregivers who feel very unappreciated, feel very deflated, they feel isolated. So this is not an easy role for someone to be a caregiver. But I think you've provided a lot of your own experiences that people can draw from, tips that they might be able to incorporate in their role as caregiver or care partner. But do you have any other words, like a new care partner or someone considering taking on the responsibility of caregiving, that you think would be helpful?
Like, being a caregiver I don't want to make it, we're sitting here very calmly and casually having this conversation, but I know how hard it is for people, and you have to sacrifice like every ounce of yourself. It's so easy to take some things personally, and there were some situations, if he was mad, he would bark at me like he was his dad, but I could see what he was doing. But before that, it was really hurtful to me because he's like, he'd say things like, if you weren't so ignorant, you would know I haven't had my coffee yet. A lot of times when I was frustrated or like just feeling a little short, which is not something that he deserved, but he caused it, but he didn't deserve it. I don't know if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that I was on TV or something, just to hold yourself a little bit more accountable when sometimes you want to be like, you know what?
Right.
There were days when I sat in the bathroom and I just prayed and cried. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there are days that are like that, but like the day that he was sitting on the edge of my bed, somehow, some way, those overtake any bad thoughts. Like, I don't have any bad thoughts. I remember all those beautiful times that we had together. It was such a purposeful task to me that the rest of everything else just seems unpurposeful to me, Like, how do you go back to like a regular job, or how do you, after he became such a big, huge part of my life,
Right.
and looking out for things like that, like, it's really hard to be without him now for me, because like I don't know, it was very rewarding and very loving, and it was like bare bones, like he needed me.
Right.
And I guess if I really want to think about it, I really needed him too, because it may not have been the perfect dad, but I remember praying for a dad. And then once, it wasn't a perfect scenario, but he was the perfect dad for me.
Thank you again for sharing your experiences with your dad. Parkinson's has a profound effect on everyone on this journey, and you definitely seem to have managed it all well, although there were challenging times, I'm sure. And I hope others on the caregiver journey are inspired by your stories and as much as I am. And maybe some will be able to relate to your experiences and can take some measure of comfort in knowing they're not alone in what they're going through as a caregiver or a care partner. I want to thank everyone out there who are caregivers and care partners this month and all year through. You are all blessings on this journey and you're greatly appreciated. So thank you again, Brenda, for joining me. And thank you, friends, for watching. Stay positive, keep moving, and I'll see you soon.